This is a Post-it note. I think a Post-it note is the greatest creation of communication of all time. You can write things you have to do on it. You can use it to keep notes for your speech. You can get pretty creative and decorate your car with it. It's kind of like text messaging 20 years before there was text messaging. But this isn't a speech about a Post-it note. This is a speech about the research that I'm doing for my next book. And it's about communication. And the reason that I bring up a Post-it note is because I'm going to share with you how this little Post-it note, which would set you back about 2 pennies, could have saved the company over $135 million. You see, Lockheed Martin in Sunnyvale, California, was building a satellite for NASA. And as they often do, they have the satellite bolted to a device that allows it to rotate so people can work on it. Well, for some reason, one day, some of the engineers who were working on it decided to take the bolts off and use them for something else. The problem was they didn't tell the crew who comes in the next morning that they had taken the bolts off that hold the satellite down. So when they turned on the satellite and tried to rotate it, it fell. That's a $135 million satellite laying on the ground because 24 bolts were removed. And nobody bothered to put a Post-it note on there saying, FYI, the satellite is no longer bolted down. NASA investigated and found that there was clearly a communication breakdown. No surprise there. The breakdown cost Lockheed Martin $135 million. Just to give you a comparison, $135 million would pay for every single student at Hancock for an entire year to go to school, buy books, pay rent, and get some food. That's how much it cost them. But again, this is a speech about communication, and it's easy to look at that and say, that's a communication breakdown, somebody screwed up. But the problem with that thinking is that things like this happen all the time. We make mistakes, we forget what we want to say, we miscommunicate. And so I don't want to look at this as an exception, I want to look at this as the norm. And I want to start off by giving you a little bit of a background about how we used to think about communication. Because what we've realized is that communication isn't a skill. In other words, it's not just that you're born as a clean slate, you don't know how to communicate, and you learn from the people who raise you. In fact, it's a little bit more complex than that. The reality is that we are born with the ability to communicate, and over time we learn how to do that. What that means is that everybody has their own unique way of communicating. Now that's probably not that unique. I mean, you probably figured that one out already. We all communicate differently. Would you agree with me on that one? We all have our own unique ways. So here's the problem with thinking that when you're born you don't know how to communicate and you learn. There is this idea that goes behind it that there must be one right way to communicate. And whatever that right way is, everybody's supposed to learn it and do it. And that hasn't worked because for hundreds of years we've been teaching communication, saying this is what you're supposed to do, only to find that many people do things differently. And so what I've started to realize is that if communication isn't a skill, there isn't one right way to communicate and therefore lots of wrong ways. There could actually be a lot of right ways to communicate. And there could be a lot of different things that people do. And maybe when satellites fall to the ground, it isn't just because somebody communicated wrong, it's because people communicate differently. Maybe they didn't put a Post-it note on there because they knew that the people who were coming in the morning had the responsibility of checking the bolts. That was actually part of their job. But who would think to check the bolts? I mean, after all, who would take bolts off of a $135 million satellite? I'll give you an example of one of the ways that we found out that it's not just a skill. And I've talked about this before. In this class, many of you admitted that you got nervous giving speeches. Here's what's really interesting. In the 1990s, James McCroskey and Virginia Richardson did some research on how many people were afraid of public speaking and how they could help people to overcome it. Here's what they found that was so interesting. People who practiced giving their speeches didn't feel less nervous than the people who didn't practice their speeches. In other words, the fear of public speaking isn't something that happens because you haven't practiced or because you're missing some sort of skill. The fear of public speaking happens because you are a human being. And the reason that we're afraid of speaking out in public is because our brains over thousands or millions of years have been programmed for us to go with the crowd. It doesn't make sense for me in a social society to be the one that's standing in front of everybody speaking out against everyone. Because if we lived in a time where My survival was dependent on us being together as a group, whether we were being protected from our enemies, saber-toothed tigers, or anything else that would kill us. If I'm standing alone, my life is at risk. So my brain is developed for me to try to fit in with people and not speak out against people, to go with the flow. So it's perfectly normal if you get nervous giving a speech. It doesn't mean that you're not a good speaker, and it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. What it means is, in fact, that your brain is working just like it should. So that being the case, I came to realize that how we communicate has more to do with our personality and the way our brains work than it does with the way we were raised. And as I started doing more and more research in this, I actually found some evidence of this. For example, when we take twins who are identical and compare them to twins who are fraternal, so they are the same age but they're not genetically the same, we find some really interesting differences. Identical twins who take surveys kind of like the one that you took will communicate the same about 60 to 70% of the time. Fraternal twins, who are just the same as any other siblings, will communicate the same only about 50% of the time, which is about the same as any other pair of siblings. So that tells me there's something in our DNA that affects how we communicate. How many of you have a sibling, have raised more than one child, know somebody who's a sibling? Does anybody who has siblings communicate very differently from your sibling? Anybody who has siblings communicate very similar to your siblings? Okay. Well, for me it was interesting because when I had my two daughters who were only 14 months apart, excuse me, who actually look the same, people think they're twins. What I found that was so interesting is they are the complete opposite. The two of them are the most opposite people that I've ever met, even though they look exactly the same. I have one that's very social, gets along with people, really easygoing. I have another child who is very, we'll say stubborn, who sometimes wants to debate with me if it's morning or evening. And yet, I raised them the same. They grew up in the same house. I mean, they have the same parents. They have the same lifestyle. The environment was the same, but yet they're so different. So researchers started to look at this new field of neuroscience. And what we found is that by looking at our brains, through functional magnetic resonance imaging, or MRIs, we can actually see how people communicate. Has anyone ever been in an MRI? Isn't it fun? So imagine this. I want to study somebody's brain. I put them in an MRI and I ask them to talk. What I'm going to be able to see is essentially a picture of what's going on inside someone's brain. So if I'm asking this person to tell me a story and I see, this has been added, but if I see activity in, let's say, this area of the brain or this area of the brain, that's telling me when you tell a story, this is the part of the brain that's doing the work. The reason that that's important is because for a long time we tended to view brains as just being two parts or two halves. There was the left side and the right side. The left side is the logical side, the right side is the creative side. Language, we thought, was in the left side of the brain. Painting, drawing, being artistic, we thought, was in the right side of the brain. The problem with that is that there is not a language center of the brain. As researchers started looking more into our brains, they found that in fact there's a pretty complex area that influences communication. If you've studied psychology or perhaps biology, you may have come across this. This is a drawing of a human brain, and it's got the 5 major areas of our brain. It's in fact the 5 areas that influence communication. So, the frontal lobe, the front of our brain, is responsible for higher order thinking, for logic, for our reasoning. The parietal lobe in the back is responsible for movement, orientation, recognition, and perception of stimuli. The temporal lobe, which is on the side here, is responsible for perception and recognition of auditory stimuli. This is kind of connected to our ears. And memory and speech. The occipital lobe in the back is connected to our vision. So ironically, although our eyes are in the front of our head, it's the back of our brain that allows us to have vision. And finally, deep inside our brain is this older region, the cerebellum and the limbic system, which influences things like fear, influences even motion and how we can stand. In fact, our entire balance is deep inside of our brain. It's what some people call the old brain or the little brain. Each of these parts has a special relationship to how we communicate. There is no one language center of the brain. And the way that researchers found this is that when people would have strokes, part of their brain would be damaged and they would lose the ability to speak. But after the stroke, they could regain the ability to speak by simply having other parts of the brain take over. So it's not as simple as we have one place in our brain that affects communication. The reason that this is important is because this is why so many of us communicate differently. Because all of these different regions influence the different kinds of things that we focus on. So when you filled out the survey, many of you had one section in that survey that ranked highest. And based on the survey, and based on the research that I'm doing, that area is the one that you're the most focused on when you communicate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and show you each of these areas. I'll tell you a little bit about it and give you some examples, and you can see if you think it does describe you. So this first area is called linguistic. We didn't ironically have anybody that had just number one, but we did have somebody who was tied for number one and number two. So linguistic communicators are people who are very focused on talking things out. They like to speak rationally. They're usually analytical, factual, and literal, and they prefer to talk about details. Do you know anybody who is very linguistic, who's very rational, analytical, factual? Okay. They'll say things like, "Do you hear me?" when they're talking to people. And the reason is because they're so focused on language that they want to make sure that people are really listening to that. Now let's compare that to number two. We had a lot of people who were number two. Number two is interesting. This is in survey terms called reverse coded. So if you scored high on this, you're actually low on this measure. So first of all, let me tell you what contextual is. Contextual is a way of seeing the world where you focus more on the situation that's taking place than you do on the things that are being said. This is actually pretty common in some parts of Asia. So I had a friend who went to Japan. He was there to do teaching. But when he got to Japan, he found something really interesting. The people in Japan loved California wines. And being that he's from California, he realized that every time he would come home, his Japanese friends would say, "Get me California wine, get me California wine, bring it back." And in Japan, they were really expensive. So it occurred to him, he has a business opportunity here. He's going to start bringing wine from California to Japan and selling it. There's this huge markup. And they were happy to pay for it. They loved California wine. It's not a big wine industry in Japan, I guess. So after he starts the business, he gets this opportunity to meet with a supermarket who is going to start carrying his wine. The CEOs, or the VPs of the supermarket, meet with him. They spend a whole day with him. They take him first out to breakfast, then they take him to a supermarket, show him around, then they take him to lunch at the corporate offices, then they take him to the warehouse where they store all the wine to show him how they're going to take care of his wine. They didn't want him to think that any of the wine would be ruined. Then they take him out to dinner, then they take him out to a show, then they drive him back to his hotel, and they say to him, after they bow, "Thank you, tomorrow morning we're going to pick you up because we know you have to go to the airport to fly home." My friend says, "That would be wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow morning," and he says yes. The reason he says yes is because that was them saying to him, "We're going to do business with you. We just did a deal." Now think about how different that is than in America. That's what we call, in Japan, low context. They don't say, "Let's get down to business, let's shake on it, let's sign a contract." They simply say, "We'll see you tomorrow," meaning we like you enough that we want to see you tomorrow. In America, what would we do? We'd sit down and we'd say, "How are you? How's your family?" "Great, great, great. Let's get down to business." Yeah, let's talk numbers right now. And then, of course, they want you to sign a contract. So if you are highly contextual, if you are high on this measure, you're actually low in contextual, which means that you don't like to leave things to the situation. You like things to be said directly. You want to tell it like it is. You don't want to beat around the bush. You don't want to let people figure it out, even if that means that you might be politically incorrect. A lot of you were high on this. How many of you say that does describe you. You would rather just tell it like it is than worry about being politically correct, okay? So that's pretty common. So people will say something to the effect of, do you get where I'm coming from? When you're talking to someone who's linguistic, they often will not really follow you because they'll feel like you're coming on really strong. Number 3 is a social communicator. We did have a couple people who were social. Social communicators are able to focus on the group or the situation. They tend to be very good at reading body language. They're often very mindful of how they speak with others. They are usually comfortable in social situations, and they like to follow social norms. Does that describe anybody who was high on this one? Anybody who feels like you're pretty good at telling if you're in a group and there's conflict, you can kind of figure it out, okay? So those are social communicators. And they'll say, how do you feel about what I'm saying? To the contextual person who will respond with, I don't really care how you feel. I just want to know if you get where I'm coming from. Number 4 are visual communicators. These people are often very artistic. It looks like we only had one person who scored highest on 4, but we had somebody who scored highest on 3 and 4. Visual communicators are really good at talking in pictures. They can talk in terms of things that they see. They can describe and elaborate visual details. They often like to have a roadmap when they're going somewhere rather than just the directions written out. So if you're visual, you're probably the kind of person who, when you do Google Maps, will not just print out the list of where to go, but will actually print out the map as well so you can look at it. I'm actually pretty high on this one myself. Visual communicators will often say, do you see what I'm saying? This drives people nuts, especially if they're linguistic communicators. They'll actually look at them and say, no, I don't see what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, but I can't see what you're saying. And finally, we have number 5. We did have 2 people, what we call cerebral. A cerebral communicator is often not comfortable with expressing too many personal emotions. They like to think before they speak. Often they need time to process messages and ideas. And they typically will view words as being powerful and influential. So these are very deep thinkers. And again, they'll ask, what do you think about what I'm saying? Now, the reason that this is so important is because imagine if we have a group where we have people from each of these different categories working together. The way that they communicate is going to influence each other, but it's also going to influence how successful the group is. And each of these people often will look at the world through their own lens and feel like their way of communicating is the best way. And what I'm trying to say is that it isn't just one best way, we all have strengths. So in an ideal world, we would take people from each of these different categories and we would try to connect them and let them all work together. I have a couple examples. Giving directions is the best example for all of these. So is there anybody who was high on number 2, willing to give us directions? Okay, so you were high on number 2. So describe how to get from here. Do you mind telling us where you live? No. You don't have to give us the actual address, but how to get from here to where you live, literally from walking out of this classroom.
Walking?
Yeah. We'll walk out of the classroom and get in the car.
Where's your car though?
Right here.
Right here?
Like there. See, there's a visual person. It's right there. I can see my He's going, why is the guy pointing to the wall?
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we get to where you live from?
Okay, so you walk up the door, you head west, right? No, east. Down that way to the parking lot, you get in your car. You're probably going to want to go south, parallel to the freeway. Take a left on the light, and then go down, take a left, and merge onto 101 North. You're going to drive down to Como, get off on Taft Street, take a right. From there, you're going to from getting off on Taft Street, you're going to take a left, go down the first light, take another left. On the first possible right turn, you're going to take a right, then go all the way up the hill and the house on the left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I didn't get exactly, but I think I got it. So here's what's interesting. There's some linguistic in you also. Because when you described it, you were telling us things like go left and trying to get us onto specific streets. Whereas as a visual person, they're going to do it a little bit differently. So you're driving down the street, you're kind of lost, you ever had this experience, and you ask someone for directions? This can be the longest day of your life if you ask the wrong person for directions. So the visual person comes along, and he says, oh, you need directions? Oh yeah, let me show you where to go. Okay, what you're gonna do is you're gonna drive down this big street here, right? You're gonna go down until you see a big brown and green. No. It's a church. It's a church. It's a big brown and green church. And you're gonna look for this big. It's really nice. It's a beautiful church. It's got stained glass windows in it. Honey, what's the church down there? I think it's a Catholic church or Presbyterian church. Honey, what's the church? Oh, no, it's a Jewish synagogue. You go down to the big Jewish place and the stained glass windows. Don't turn, just keep going. You're going to pass that. You're going to go maybe a few more trees past it. You're going to want to make a left. No, I'm sorry. You're going to want to, you're going to be, no, right, that's right. You're going to go just go that way. When you get to the corner, there's a gas station on the corner. You're going to go that way. And then you're going to look for the school, past the school. If you can, go around the Jack in the Box. Beautiful house there. Honey, what the beautiful house? Who is that? The Joneses. I know he doesn't know the Joneses, but you'll pass the Joneses' house. And then just keep going. You can't miss it. You'll see it right there. So there's my visual directions. I've also had a visual person who loves maps. I'm driving and I ask for directions, and here's the guy. He's in the air doing this. Okay, so you're going to go this way and this way. He's drawing a map in the air. The best part is he makes a mistake and he goes, no. Here's our social person. Oh yeah, just follow me. I'm going 3 miles from there. I'll show you where it is. Come on. That's our social. Doesn't want to leave me hanging. Here's my cerebral person. Oh, yeah. You know, it's pretty far down there. No, don't go. I can tell you where it is. Come back. Because you're tired of waiting for the guy. And then here is our contextual person. You're going there. That's not a good neighborhood. I wouldn't go there if I were you. There's a lot of crime in that neighborhood. Why are you going there? Oh, your mother lives there? You know, I'd get her to move if I were you. So directions are one thing, but here's the thing. Imagine if we've got people who are working in the same organization. We've got people who are really good at describing visual things, working with people who don't see it that way. And they start to clash with each other. How about teams? Could you imagine 5 people, one of each of these on a team, trying to have a conversation? Here's the thing about teams, is they work great when people are thinking and acting the same way. But the problem is that that's not good for a team. If everybody is linguistic, they're probably not an extremely creative team. If you're a manager or you're leading people and you've got different types of people, that many of these people, so for example, we have a lot of contextual people, the employees are going to think of that contextual person because they tend to be very direct and to the point and not worried so much about being politically correct. They'll think, my boss is just so crude and rude and he's just so demanding. But in fact, it makes sense to be that way. Oh, in relationships. I don't know why in relationships we're attracted to people who are opposite of us. Maybe it's because these complement each other. But when you have 2 people who are very opposite from each other, it's really difficult to communicate. But luckily there's an industry called marriage counseling. Parents and kids. Sales. This is one for sales that's really interesting. So if you've got somebody who's visual and you're not talking to them speaking the visual language, then it's going to be harder to sell them. But if you know that this person is visual and you start saying to them, so take cars, see yourself driving down the road in this car. The person's like, I had a salesman who told me, you look good in this car. okay, I'm not buying it because I look good in it. But that was his thinking, is that I was buying it because I would look good in it. All right, so I'm not going to go into a lot of details about how to connect because we're going to run out of time and I want to wrap this up, but I'll share with you just the fact that if you know this and you recognize other people, you have this opportunity to connect with them on their own level. And it takes a little bit of practice, but we've talked about a lot of the things in this class. So hopefully, even though that was quick, it gets you thinking about some of the things that would improve communication. I mean, imagine what it would be like if the people who were communicating with each other and understanding each other better actually accepted our differences instead of focusing so much on what's the one right way. So after this class and after this speech, as many of you said, I hope that you will think of this as not the end of your public speaking training, but really the completion of the big first step, and that you will continue to work on all of these things that you said that you want to work on. I was thinking, as many of you said, back to the first day, the first couple of days of this class, how nervous some of you were, how difficult it was to get up and speak, and then watching you get up today and speak was really a huge difference. How many of you really do feel like you've gotten better at this? I've been very impressed with it. So I want to say this, if at any point down the road you need a letter of recommendation, whether it's for a job or you want to study abroad or you're transferring, you're more than welcome to contact me. You have my email on the syllabus. You can always come and ask me, and I'd be happy to do that and talk about how much you've improved at public speaking. So I really do applaud you for finishing this class. You might recall there were more people in here when we started. And it is scary, it's difficult for people to do. So in a lot of ways, you have really overcome some big obstacles, not just by getting up and speaking, but actually sticking with the class and completing it. So I hope you guys have a great holiday break and take some more communication classes next year. And keep in touch. I'd love to see you again and know how things are going. So congratulations to all of you for doing this.